Decolonizing your TBR should be an all year round thing, especially in this hellscape that is the state of Florida, with our psycho governor who is banning every book possible. Hey there, creepy peeps. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Vicky. I talk about horror movies, books, sometimes TV shows, all spooky stuff all the time. So if you end up liking this video, you should subscribe and become a creepy peep today. You can already tell what this video is from the title, so let's just get right into it. And this is a story about Jake, obviously, who can see ghosts, which sounds fun in theory, but not so much in practice. So Jake keeps seeing the ghost of Sawyer, who was a school shooter, and this ghost is different. Unlike the others, Sawyer can interact with Jake, and it starts to seem like Sawyer wants to possess Jake and get a second chance at life. And not only does Jake have to deal with the fact that he can see ghosts all the time, which is incredibly frightening, he also has to deal with being one of the very few Black and queer kids at his mostly white straight prep school, and all of the microaggressions and outright racism that comes with that. So this is one of the quicker reads on my list, but it certainly packs a punch. It manages to fit in the trauma that Jake is experiencing and has experienced in a way that doesn't make it seem like it's just glossing over things. These very serious topics are definitely given their weight in the book. And it's a super frightening story, both in a realistic sense with the school shooting aspect and in a supernatural sense with the ghosts that Jake sees, especially the way they're described. They're super freaky. Overall, this is just a really well-rounded horror story that I would recommend. Next is the Gilda Stories, which made my best of list for 2022. And even though this isn't like an outright horror story, it does follow vampire Gilda throughout her life as a Black immortal woman in the United States. It's also not a typical story structure. It's more a series of vignettes at different points in Gilda's life. And this might be one of the best vampire stories I've ever read, if I'm being honest. Not only are we following Gilda as she processes and deals with the fact that she is an immortal being now, but also the fact that she is a Black queer woman in the United States. I won't spoil specifics, but it does take her quite a long time to truly process this, which is definitely purposefully done and a really unique way to explore generational trauma, as obviously nobody gets centuries to unpack and deal with the trauma they've experienced in their life. But Gilda does get all this time, and it's really interesting to read exactly how long it takes her to unpack all of this. In summation, read this book if you know what's good for you. It's fantastic. And it's unlike any other vampire book you've read. I can promise you that. Next book I'm going to recommend is The Good House by Tananarive Due. This is a bit more of a slow burn story, but the buildup is absolutely worth it. The story is following Angela, who is returning to her grandmother's house after being away for many years following a horrible tragedy that befell her family. When Angela returns to town, she finds out her family wasn't the only one that experienced senseless tragedies. The town has been plagued by them since she's been gone. And eventually Angela begins to believe that her son actually may have awoken a long, dormant, vengeful spirit that her grandmother encountered as a girl. This is usually sold as a haunted house story. Like, I feel like it's been on every single list of, like, you know, best haunted house books you could read. I'm not saying that's inaccurate, but I feel like it doesn't quite do this book justice because it's so much more than just a haunted house story. It focuses a lot more on the characters and how the haunting of this property essentially affects them all. And all of these characters, speaking of, are so well developed, even the most vile characters in the story, which just makes them even scarier. And kind of like the Gilda stories, I would definitely say this is also a tale about generational trauma through the conduit of this like horribly haunted estate. It's really hard to describe the depth that this book has, but if you're not scared of a slightly longer read, I would highly, highly recommend it. I truly don't understand why it's not considered a horror classic yet. Going from the longest book on this list to the shortest, I have The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle. So this is a retelling of an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Horror at Red Hook, which according to the internet is generally considered one of Lovecraft's like worst written stories. And it's also an incredibly racist story, but that tracks because Lovecraft was incredibly racist. I love this idea that Victor LaValle, who I read in interviews and articles, has said that he read Lovecraft as a kid, loved the stories, and he's definitely a huge influence on him today as an author. Love this idea of him creating this retelling that is an answer to this obviously influential figure in LaValle's life, but also a really shitty person. The story follows Charles Thomas Tester, who does any odd job he can to support himself and his father. Our story kicks off when Charles delivers a mysterious occult book to a woman, and he ends up getting involved with this wealthy white man who is obsessed with like alternate realities and different planes of existence. I think that's mostly where like the Lovecraft stuff comes in. As someone who hasn't read Lovecraft and certainly hasn't read any of the like Cthulhu stories, I didn't feel like there were any parts of this book that I genuinely had no idea what was going on. You'll probably get a little bit more out of it if you've read Lovecraft's work, but I don't think it's a requirement at all to read this. And in this little book, it's got such like incredibly rich and almost hilarious themes, including but not limited to this idea that the only thing scarier to rich white people than this like giant fucking monster from another plane of existence is a black man in power. It's a brilliant horror novella that it's a must read. It's a must read, and it's so short. You have no excuse. And finally, I'm gonna end with definitely my number one pick on this list. I didn't intend it to be ranked, but if I did rank it, this would be number one. And it is The Changeling, also by Victor LaValle. This is one of the best horror books I've ever read, period. It follows Apollo, who is incredibly excited about being a new father when the most like horrific and unthinkable tragedy happens. I won't get into details on that, but it ends up with his wife missing and Apollo in jail. So when Apollo gets out of jail, he goes on a search for not only his wife, but answers as to this incredibly tragic thing that happened to him. You might be able to tell from the title of this book that it borrows heavily from like the myths and folklore surrounding changelings, which I think just in and of itself is just a really scary concept. This is a truly modern fairy tale, but like the real kind of fairy tales, like the ones that are gruesome and really scary, not like the light and fluffy ones. I would very weirdly describe reading this book like eating 7-layer dip. Every time I got to the bottom of things, I realized there was still more beneath the surface that I was excavating. So I had to keep going, but the dip is just so good. I was like happy to keep digging, and eventually I'm gobbling it up and like licking the plate because it's just so good. At no point did I even guess like in the realm of what the ending of this book was gonna be. My jaw was on the floor for the last 50 pages or so. It was fucking incredible. It's a beautiful and terrifying story that I think everybody should read in their lifetime. If I made one of those lists you see on the internet of like the 10, 20, 30, whatever books that everyone should read before they die, this would be on there. So please, please, please share your favorite horror and thriller books written by Black authors in the comments, and or let us know which ones are on your TBR right now. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're new here, become a creepy peep today. I will see you very soon with a new video. Until then, stay strange. Bye.